It's my pleasure to introduce fellow Rotarian Joan Toone. Joan's been married to husband Terry for 54 years. They have a son, a daughter, and 4 grandchildren. Joan's a Rotarian and past president of the Rotary Club of Victoria. She was honored to be proposed for Rotary by RI President Gary Hong and seconded by RI President Rick King. Joan is also a polio survivor. Joan and Terry have been host parents. They are both multiple Paul Harris Fellows and Foundation benefactors. They have received Foundation District Service Award twice. Joan has also received a President's Commendation and a District 5020 Award of Excellence. She is a recipient of the Governor General's Caring Canadian Award and the Sovereign Medal for Volunteers. Please welcome Joan Toone.
Hello, Rotarians. I'm honored to be invited to speak to you. Imagine a world that has eradicated a second horrific disease, where children do not know about wheelchairs, braces, or iron lungs for polio. Imagine a world that will never again have to fear polio. That sounds like an impossible task, but today we're almost there. You are creating that world and making those precious hopes and dreams real. Poliomyelitis comes from the Greek words polios and mylos, meaning gray marrow. This disease is very old. The first recorded case is the 4,000-year-old funeral stela of Ruma, a Syrian priest who got polio at age 5. The mummified remains of Pharaoh Septa from 1187 BC show his wasted leg and rigidly extended foot with the familiar shape of a horse's hoof, indicative of polio. Today, we can explain how the poliovirus works. It's very small and highly contagious. It enters the body through the mouth and multiplies in the throat and gastrointestinal tract. After reaching the bloodstream, the virus then moves to the central nervous system, where it replicates itself in hours, damaging and destroying the nerve cells called motor neurons, which control our muscles. In early times, babies were protected from poliomyelitis because of the colostrum in their mother's milk, but were exposed to it soon after they were weaned. They usually developed a mild case, and that gave them antibodies against polio. Industrialization brought improvements in sanitation, such as the purification of drinking water, pasteurization of milk, and the implementation of a sewage system. Many diseases were weakened or destroyed by these actions, but the poliovirus actually gained strength and changed from a disease so mild few knew it existed to an epidemic that terrorized the world. Polio arrived in North America in 1874, and the first epidemic was in New York City in 1916. Panic set in, as once healthy children suddenly died, while others were left with twisted spines, ravaged lungs, and weakened limbs. Fear of contamination meant that children were not allowed to drink from public water fountains, and many were banned from stores and restaurants. Terrified parents who were well-to-do fled the city with over 50,000 children, but those under 16 were often turned back by deputy sheriffs armed with shotguns. Such was the fear over this vicious disease. To fight poliomyelitis, streets in New York were scrubbed with 4 million gallons of water every day. Cats became suspect as carriers, resulting in 72,000 being destroyed in New York City alone, yet polio raged on. False cooling weather brought a decline in cases, but in that first epidemic, 27,000 became ill and 6,000 perished, and it would continue every single year after that. One of the earliest iron lungs was developed at Children's Hospital in Boston. It consisted of a galvanized iron box, a bed, and air pumps from 2 vacuum cleaners attached to an electric motor. It worked by changing the pressure inside the machine. Lower it, the chest cavity would expand and try to fill the partial vacuum. Raise the pressure, and the chest would contract to mimic natural breathing. Later, a bellows was attached directly to the iron lung, and these early and rather crude machines led to the saving of thousands of lives. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was struck by polio at the age of 39, leaving him with severe and permanent paralysis. Yet he went on to become president and leader of the Western world. FDR established the National Foundation for Infant Paralysis in 1938, later known as the March of Dimes. Times were hard, so people were asked to send just a dime to the president to help him battle against polio. In a few weeks, 2,680,000 dimes were mailed to the White House. Now, this plan worked because it relied on small donations from many rather than large donations from a few, and it revolutionized medical philanthropy. The president's face is on the US dime in honor of this. Each summer, frantic parents waited to see if polio would come to their town. If so, there was nothing they could do to safeguard their children from this virus that appeared from nowhere with virtually no treatment and absolutely no cure. One case would arrive, then more and more. Children were kept indoors for protection, but it could not stop polio from spreading. Extreme measures were needed. Towns and cities were sprayed with DDT, an insecticide that would later be banned from use due to its drastic effects. Children in swimming pools and lakes could easily ingest poliovirus, so they were also sprayed in hopes they could bring poliomyelitis to a halt. When that was not successful, pools and movie theaters were closed and parks were shut. When I was a young child, summers were a time of sunny days and playing with friends. We drank from the garden hose, shared a soda pop or an ice cream, and giggled if secrets were revealed. We rushed out in the morning and had such fun until we were called in when it grew late. The next day was eagerly anticipated, but something terrible was about to happen and my life would never be the same. I woke one morning and I found my neck was stiff, my back was sore, and I had a fever. After my mother called the family doctor, I had to stay in bed and no one could come into my room. Quarantine signs were pasted on our house, and it was scary. My greatest comfort was Mary, my only doll. She was my best friend, and I loved her dearly. I talked to her if I was troubled, and when I hugged her tight, I always felt better. The doctor explained that my beloved doll was made of plaster and cloth, so when I got well, she would have to be burned. Oh no, please, don't burn my Mary. Could my dog come in then? She's always with me, and I'm sad without her. But doctors were afraid that pets still carried the virus, so she was not allowed in either. All I could do was lay there, alone and afraid. And then that awful day, I could not move my left side. I was paralyzed. My parents had already dealt with polio when my brother was paralyzed from his neck down in just 4 hours. Now, they had to rush me to the hospital as well. Just picture this, 2 kids with polio and no idea if either of us would recover. The cold reality of what might happen is there even for this young child, because I already knew that some children would die, like my friend Sharon, who lived 3 doors away. This was very difficult for me to comprehend, but then I was only 7 years old. The isolation ward was overflowing with anxious youngsters who were brought in from surrounding towns and farms. Some were strapped onto boards. Others had to use a chest respirator to assist them to breathe. But it was the little children encased in iron lungs, utterly helpless, depending on that terrifying machine with the frightful sound for their life. Just imagine being 5 or 6, locked in that steel box and surrounded by strangers. Some of these children were so very small, just little babies. Everything is white and stark. Smells are unfamiliar, lights are bright, and the noisy machines seemed like monsters to us. We endured frightening treatments without explanations of what they were for. I was given a bath in hot wax, petrifying, until I learned it would be so soothing. We saw and heard things that no child should have to experience, like the death of another child and the strange silence that filled the room. So challenging to understand. Frightened children need their parents, but isolation was rigid. Some lucky moms and dads were able to look through their child's window and wave, but that would be all. And most of us did not have that small contact. So there we were. No parents, no loving pets, and no cherished toys. Would my doll Mary be there when I got back? Would I ever go home again? No one could tell us for sure. As we struggled through rehabilitation, we wondered what it would be like if we did finally get home. Once we did, we quickly learned it would be hard, as we were shunned by some children and teased by others because of our braces, cumbersome wheelchairs, and pronounced limps. April the 12th, 1955 was a historical day when Dr. Jonas Salk introduced his polio vaccine. This was made from an inactivated poliovirus given by injection, and it's very safe. It produces humoral or bloodstream immunity, which keeps the virus from migrating to the central nervous system. But it only protects the inoculated person and could not prevent the rampant spread of the disease. People lined up by the hundreds for even a chance of protection because it was the only hope available. 6 years later, Dr. Albert Sabin introduced his oral vaccine, made from a live virus, but in a weakened state, so it's impotent to harm in the central nervous system. It results in the creation of powerful antibodies. If wild poliovirus is ingested, it's killed in the gut and cannot multiply, and that will halt the epidemic. So this quickly became the favored vaccine. A Disney writer was inspired when his son got the polio drops. The song he wrote, "A Spoonful of Sugar" for Mary Poppins. People were now in full panic about polio. Stands were set up on street corners and in stores and schools to provide vaccine. Lineups were unbelievable, as everyone wanted to be protected from this relentless disease. Finally, thanks to immunization, the terrible summers of fear began to decline. Polio had not been eradicated yet. Today, there's more than 20 million people worldwide who survived polio and now face a new obstacle. During acute polio, many nerve cells were destroyed. The surviving motor neurons had to attach themselves to orphan muscles and carry many times their normal load. After about 30 years, overworked neurons break down and can no longer activate their muscle fibers, which causes muscle loss, severe pain, and many physical problems. This is post-polio syndrome. There may be significant changes in daily life due to debilitating fatigue, cold intolerance, and severe weakness. Some will be unable to work, creating financial difficulties. This syndrome is permanent and progressive, and it's caused by polio. If we eradicate polio, we also stop this second phase. 2 problems halted with 1 solution. Rotary and polio connect in more ways than you can imagine. Your club might have a polio survivor you're unaware of. I was telling a Rotary group that children learned to keep their polio secret because people were so afraid. Some people have continued to keep that silence. When I finished, a Rotarian stood and announced that he was a polio survivor, and then quickly sat down. It was the first time he had ever felt safe enough to reveal this troublesome childhood memory. The trust he felt in the compassion and understanding of his fellow Rotarians allowed him to finally release this burden. Some say there's a Rotary moment when one realizes why they became a Rotarian. That was my Rotary moment. Another Rotarian said how lucky he had been as a child. There were no iron lungs available for him, but a little girl who was in one died, and now he could use it. I saw the pain and guilt he had been carrying over this for his entire life. It wasn't just those with polio who suffered. A Rotarian explained that she was a young nurse during the epidemics. At night, she watched over 12 children in iron lungs, and if the power went out, she was alone until help arrived. She would have to crank the lever at the end of each iron lung to pump precious oxygen into the lungs. The terrible dilemma of which bed to start with still haunts her to this day. These are just a few of the hidden effects of polio. During those earlier epidemics, there were 350,000 cases of polio annually, where thousands, mostly children, would be paralyzed, many crippled for life. Every single year, 50,000 would die from this appalling disease. For Rotarians, this was simply unacceptable. Rotary International's new Health, Hunger, and Humanity Committee was looking in a new direction in 1978. They wanted programs that were bigger than any club or district could handle, but could be worked by Rotarians working as a global team. Rotary International committed to provide and help deliver polio vaccine to almost 6 million children in the Philippines. It was a great success. RI wanted to do something very special for Rotary's 100th anniversary in 2005 and decided to provide polio vaccine to all the children of the world. And they made this promise. Polio eradication would be their #1 priority and would continue as such until eradication is achieved. This was the most ambitious program in Rotary's history, the largest public health initiative the world has known, and one of the greatest humanitarian projects in the world that was not initiated by a government agency. In 1985, Dr. Albert Sabin warned that by Rotary's 100th anniversary, there would be 8 million more children paralyzed and probably 800,000 deaths. He said, to begin, 500 million children would have to be immunized and $100 million would be needed to purchase vaccine. Rotary aimed for a target of 120 million, just to be sure. This would be their first major fundraising campaign by Rotarians worldwide, and just 2 years later, they had raised $247 million. Rotary then approached the World Health Organization, who represented some of the most knowledgeable health authorities in the world, saying they wanted to eradicate polio. But Rotary was seen as merely a service club. RI explained they had 1 million Rotarians worldwide and $247 million in their pocket, and that changed everything. Rotary became partners with World Health, UNICEF, and the US Centers for Disease Control, and later the Gates Foundation and many governments around the world. So, a massive war against polio began. The Americas became the proving ground for an eradication strategy that would be adopted worldwide. In 1991, the final case of polio was this little boy from Peru, and 3 years later, the Americas became declared officially polio-free. Now the polio battlefield moved to other infected lands with Rotarians determined to help children. There's still no cure for polio. Maintaining high levels of immunization is the single most effective protection possible. Some people refuse immunizations due to unfounded fears of potential side effects. I can assure you that a possible reaction from a vaccination is nothing compared to the horrific realities of a disease such as polio. Sadly, every 20 seconds, a child in our world still dies from a vaccine-preventable disease. The idea of losing a child is inconceivable. Imagine a child unable to walk, breathe on their own, or worse, dead, and knowing every day of your life this could have been prevented with a simple vaccination. I strongly believe in immunization because there was no polio vaccine to help me then, and I still remember the horror of being paralyzed. I struggle with the after effects of polio, post-polio syndrome, every day, and this affects my family and friends as well. Vaccinations are the greatest medical achievement the world has known, not just treating a virus, but actually stopping the virus from developing, and we see that action with polio immunizations. The countries where transmission of endemic wild poliovirus have never been stopped are Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Nigeria. However, they're all working to deliver vaccination services to their people, as well as immunizing migrating populations who cross their common borders. Nigeria marks 2 years without any reported cases of wild poliovirus. The fact that no new cases have been detected there points to the improved surveillance and rapid response protocols Rotary and its GPEI members have established, especially in insecure and inaccessible areas. It's also exciting that no case of type 3 wild poliovirus has been found since 2012, and we're on the brink of declaring it polio eradicated as well. Rotarians, we are winning this. But some may ask why polio eradication is taking so long. Well, There's 4 reasons. Polio exists in areas where there's war. It's in countries where the public health systems are virtually non-existent. It's extremely difficult reaching children in the most inaccessible places on earth, not just once, but many times, to ensure all are protected. This terrible disease mainly affects children under 5, with horrific results. Infections lead to irreversible paralysis for some, others will die. It's difficult to detect. 72 out of every 100 will not show any symptoms. They'll carry the virus in their gut, eventually excreting it, which might infect others. As people handle contaminated items, walk in, wash with, or drink infected water, polio can easily spread. And it can exist for long periods in water and sewage. However, it needs a human host to reproduce, as it is strictly a human pathogen and does not naturally infect any other species. Without that host, epidemics will come to a halt, and you are making that global protection a reality. A Rotarian goes on an NID, National Immunization Day, at their own expense. They must negotiate with foreign governments, face problems with culture and language, fear and mistrust before traveling over difficult and dangerous terrain, and yet they continue. To maintain viability, vaccine must be kept at a proper temperature, so refrigerators and cold boxes are placed throughout jungles, across deserts, and on mountains in readiness for a National Immunization Day. Unfortunately, some parents will hide their children. If these unvaccinated children become infected and the family travels, that can lead to the reinfection of another area. And as long as polio exists anywhere, it puts children everywhere in danger. The work of Polio Plus means the global group of Rotarians have created a model for public-private partnerships that will expand and advance world health issues. Working together with proven ways to deal with diseases will be a legacy from Rotary that will remain long after the battle against polio has been won. You've been so successful that some warring sides have stopped fighting so national immunization teams can vaccinate their children. One can hope the service of Rotary will be seen by those who do battle as a means to have peace. Political upheaval and social issues are a concern, but with focus and cooperation, the endgame of 2020 is still possible. Rotarians have worked nonstop to end polio since 1985. I know you're tired and you want to see the end of this grueling project, but if we stop now and polio spreads again, experts estimate there will be 200,000 new paralytic cases yearly. Millions of dollars, countless hours, and the colossal efforts of thousands of people will have been in vain. Continuing towards success, Rotary International has announced $96.5 million US to battle polio. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation will continue to match every Rotary dollar 2-for-1, up to $50 million per year until 2020, showcasing their outstanding relationship with Rotary International. Remember, when you donate to the Rotary Foundation for Polio Plus, this also goes towards your Paul Harris points. Examples of the positive are Brazil, where the poliovirus was detected in their sewage system, but due to the country's high level of immunization, herd immunity protected people. In Israel, routine surveillance detected polio in their sewers, but immediate response and action meant no polio cases occurred. The results of the global effort to eradicate polio are astonishing. More than 16 million children have been saved from paralysis, and over 1.5 million deaths have been prevented. Since your program, billions are now safe from the horrors of polio. That's right, billions, because of you. Past RI President John Germ says, right now, every time a new case of polio is identified, it really could be the last one the world will ever see. Research is driving new evidence-based approaches to protect children against polio, even in the most difficult places, using smartphone application Survey 123. This enables the GPEI to capture data in real time and ensure polio workers are being efficiently deployed in high-risk polio areas and used to their greatest advantage. At the present time, the world is converting to IPV, which is an injected and an activated polio vaccine. Full-dose IPV is delivered through an intramuscular injection, but IPV can be given intradermally into the skin. When delivered in this way, only 1/5 of a dose is needed to generate almost as much immunity as one full dose delivered into the muscle, and 2 fractional doses generates more immunity than 1 full dose. This innovation is making financial savings by reducing the cost of IPV and enabling the limited supply to go much further. Rotary International made their commitment to end this terrible disease in 1985, and Rotarians have never wavered, determined to continue until every last child is protected from this crippling horror. Rotarians believe in service above self, so they work for others in their towns and cities across this country and throughout the world to end polio. They use fundraisers, posters, handouts, and bright yellow bumper stickers. Light up evenings, bring awareness about polio eradication, and many famous people have taken part in the We Are This Close campaign. Geographical isolation, poor public infrastructure, armed conflicts, and cultural upheaval continue to hamper eradication efforts, but don't feel defeated. We have gone from 1,000 paralytic cases every single day in 1979 to just 22 wild polio cases in all of 2017. To date this year, we only have 19 cases in the entire world. However, we must remain vigilant until enough people are vaccinated for sufficient time, thus allowing the virus to die out due to lack of human hosts. Until then, the world continues to be at risk for another destructive outbreak of polio epidemics. The Polio Eradication Program is an international endeavor with thousands of people involved, but it's Rotarians like you who are amazing, quietly doing your part, not seeking recognition, but simply because it is the right thing to do. And that is the very essence of Rotary. You joined Rotary because it was a good organization that made a difference in people's lives. This time, the life is a child's, and there's no greater gift than helping a child. Nelson Mandela said, Rotary's work towards eradicating polio has shown the power of a global network of people who are ready to roll up their sleeves and put their heart and soul into saving children from disability. National immunization teams will tell you about the people who did get polio and how their twisted limbs and inability to walk condemns them to a frightful ordeal every day of their lives. Polio affects physical mobility and learning capability while creating poverty and isolation. Many will face a dark future of having to beg and hope that others may be generous to them. A life living in the dirt or twisted and in pain is a terrible future that no one should have to endure, and Rotarians are resolved to end this once and for all. They say there's a magical moment when you give that precious vaccine and you know you have just saved this child from polio. Can there be anything better than that? Rotarians are profoundly affected by their NID experiences. Encourage them to tell you about it. When polio is eradicated, the world will recognize there are endless possibilities that may also be achievable. Working together, without a political agenda or prejudice towards others, but rather with compassion, tolerance, and empathy, the world can change. From fractional dosing delivered intradermally to needle-free injectors to micropatch needles, innovations are changing the landscape of how we get that vaccine, that final millimeter, so it can protect a child against polio. The leaders of the world have clearly expressed that without Rotary International, this monumental achievement would never be accomplished. We will eradicate polio in the world, and it will happen only because Rotary made a promise 33 years ago, and the world has learned that Rotarians keep their promises. RI President Barry Rassin asked members to be the inspiration. How better to inspire mankind than eradicating a terrible disease that has caused so much pain and grief? When Rotary achieves this incredible goal that will remain for all time, the world will surely be inspired to reach new heights. Who knows what the future may hold, but it will be a better world, and that is because of you. Rotarians, Paul Harris would be very proud of you, and I humbly thank you.